And
hello, everyone. We made it over. I'm Sean Collins. I'm going to be moderating this panel, so we'll give everyone a few seconds for the digital movement across the rooms into the breakout here. And then we'll get going in just a second in introducing the panelists. And so maybe while we wait, I'll introduce again who we've got on this panel. So we've got Barry Morishita, Aaron Stan Crush, Lisa Holmes, and Marianne Chichak, each of whom bring a really sort of unique and diverse set of experiences from a lot of different municipalities in the province. So really excited to have everyone here today. So I kind of prefer just jump right in. The format that we'll use is we'll take about 15 or 20 minutes here for a few pre-prepared questions that we've got for the panelists. And then as Chad mentioned, if you go to slido.com and put in next 30, you can click on the municipal leaders panel as one of the options. And so if anyone wants to pre-populate questions in there, or as we're going, I'll go to that as far as where we track questions from. So please start populating that on the municipal side. All right, so to kick things off, we're gonna go through one by one. And the first question we had for each of our panelists here is, which of these ideas shared today resonates most for you or your community and organization, and why? So we'll kick things off with Marianne. If you'll do us the honors of going first, and then we'll go through the rest of the panelists from there.
Absolutely. So as a municipal leader, one of the things that really resonated with me was the energy portion of it and the renewable options and opportunities that are out there. I think if municipalities took a look in their own back door and worked with consultants to see how they could research and develop things like lithium, geothermal possibilities, hydrogen. I know in our backyard, we hired a consultant to look through our region and are absolutely amazed at the value added and diversification possibilities that are out there. And that part resonated in terms of renewable possibilities that you had mentioned in there very briefly, forestry. And on that one, forestry, a lot of options. The only thing that I would question in the report is it did indicate that we have the capacity to meet the surging demand. And coming from a forest-based community, I would hesitate on that one with all the different restrictions that are out with forestry and with the cuts to their annual allowable cuts. That could be something that is not attainable and sustainable in the future. So I think with forestry, that's one that we have to work with the province and the federal governments to continue to develop to remain sustainable, but definitely the energy portion caught my eye.
That's great. Thanks, Marianne. Barry, we'll throw it over to you for comment next on what your favorite concept or idea was.
So yeah, my actually, I kind of lingered on two, and that was the budget and the welcoming and the inclusive society. And
go in on my iPad.
Because municipalities.
This is Rock Saucer, and I want to go into the.
Oh, we got some background chat there. You're muted, Sean, if you want to say.
Bev Shaw, could you go on mute? Sorry.
There we go. Okay. Anyway, there was a couple sections. So the budget resonated for sure. I really thought the Citizens Panel on Fiscal Reform is something that would be really cool to put through. But really as a section though, the inclusive piece was really resonated with me as a municipal leader. And the reason is that as I think it was Dr. Novak that talked about community-based ways of improving healthcare. I think community-based actions actually are the most and the quickest way to get progress done. We are hand to hand here in the municipal world. We deal with residents one-on-one. And I know that even sounds daunting for those of you that are thinking about running. In Calgary, we have wards of 90,000. I know it's a little bit different, but at the end of the day, it's still hand to hand. It's still community to community progress. And those concepts, I think, are really, really important. And from my seat, both as a leader of AUMA and a mayor, I've seen the best progress be made when we take control of those things at a local level. And I think our biggest detriment, to be quite clear to us, are all the barricades that are placed to us, artificially in my opinion, with the kind of institutions that are in our way. When we think about Alberta Health Services, when we think about the provincial government and the institutional barricades that they place on community building, I think all of these ideas would go a long ways if we were to take that approach.
Interesting. I like that. I think it'd be good maybe later in the Q&A to jump into some of those institutional barriers. I think that's a great thing to flag. All right, Lisa, do you want to go next as far as sharing a bit of your perspective on this?
Sure. And I think one of the interesting things being the retired politician in this circumstance is I have a little more freedom to speak up about some of the big concerns that I feel are there. But what I loved in the report was the preamble. And it seems really strange, but on each of the topic areas, I felt like we should just take some of these wording and statements and like nail them to the wall. Systemic change, like why are we not doing some of these things? I loved the idea on economic diversification when we talked about we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This isn't a place where we have to go and look out to the world to find opportunity. It's here, it's now, we have it here. But it's how do we remove the barriers to the businesses and the sectors and the industries to be able to move forward? I thought those were really great, but the thing that resonated with me on all the ideas was the idea of the A prize. And it seems strange, but it actually relates a lot to AUMA, because one of the things that I loved about the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association is they really focus on being solution-based and always making sure that when you're walking into a meeting with a government or a meeting with someone else, that you're coming not just with an issue, but with what the solution should be. And I really think that that's the place where Alberta needs to be. We love risk taking. We love building up new sectors and really promoting what businesses can be and what municipalities need as well as a business unit, but as community leaders and driving economic futures. And I think the opportunity for us to be able to really invest in that thinking and be the ones to drive best practice and leaders in the sector is where we need to be. I'm not sure that we can get there with current thinking and systemic changes that are just barriers in place, but I'm excited about what that could be.
That's great. I really love the frame of bringing solutions to the table. One of our sort of taglines in this is we need to move from whining to winning, and kind of in that model that it feels like we spent quite a bit of time as a province just whining, and the price of criticism is an alternative. So to come with a real alternative, I think is a good focus to have in your work. Okay, over to Aaron to sort of finish us off on the first question here.
Sure. So, there were a number of ideas that resonated with me personally. And I think there's a number of things too where the siloing didn't sit quite well, because some of these things in terms of reconciliation should be an underpinning of everything that we do. The social and inclusivity should be an underpinning of everything that we do. And I think at the municipal level, we really see how we can't, everything touches on everything else. And, with respect to AOSTRA and the A prize, right now we're running the mayor's nation, the mayor's office in Calgary. I'm the program lead. And one of it, the whole impetus behind it was going to the community to get the best ideas, because recognizing we don't necessarily have the best ones, and understanding that we have a lot of experts within our community that do. But we also brought with it a more holistic lens. It's about how do we get to net zero. So that kind of relates to this idea about how we need to be ambitious in our targets. But to achieve both environmental, economic, and social resilience. Over the next week, we're going to see here how the impacts of climate change, like with this incredible heat wave that's coming across the province, how that's going to impact our most vulnerable. And as a municipality, we can't avoid those interconnections. And so, that's where that AOSTRA idea kind of resonates with me, just in terms of the work that we're doing now. I think from a municipal perspective, it's how do we bring these all together? How do we ensure that we are meeting the day-to-day needs, as Barry mentioned?
That's great. I'm going to come back to you to start off on our second question, because you sort of touched really well on the need for connections. And so our second question of the panelists here is, what connections do you see to things already happening in our province? So of work that you're involved in or work you're sort of participating in. We want to know what connections already exist or what's already underway that this work can sort of weave into. So Aaron, we'll go back to you to kick off on that one.
Sure. Well, I know some of the things, another idea that I didn't bring up, but that relates to some of the work currently going on at the City of Calgary was with respect to Indigenous procurement. And so about a year and a half ago at the city, and this is something, it was called a social procurement policy. Now it's called a benefit-driven procurement policy, but it's designed with how we can expand our local economy, but bring in traditionally underrepresented groups and make sure that we have everybody kind of participating on more of a global level. So that work is undergoing. We have, as I mentioned, our own innovation challenge work that's happening here, the climate work, our economic strategy, Calgary and the new economy, that is touching on a lot of these things. So it's hard to separate. We have the anti-racism work that we've been doing at the City of Calgary for about a year ago. We really started initiating that, so going back to the social and inclusive piece. So I think what you'll find is that at the municipal level, a lot of these, not specific, but the underpinnings, like the foundation that we need to be able to move these forward is probably where a lot of this can start happening.
That's wonderful. We'll go to Barry next. Would love to hear either from the AUMA lens or the Brooks lens, anything that's already happening that you think these ideas could connect into, or things that are already ahead of these ideas.
Yeah, sure. So a couple of things. First, from an overall perspective, one of the things that municipalities have had to learn, and really quite quickly over particularly the last 4 or 6 years, the last 2 provincial governments, I would say, in particular, is that we don't have time to not change. We've faced extreme stress on funding side. We've experienced extreme stress on the downloading side, and we don't have 30 years to adjust. We have 1 budget cycle to adjust. And when I think of things like, welcoming inclusive, for instance. So in my community in the city of Brooks, we're one of the most diverse communities in North America. We have a significant portion of new Canadians here that have moved here in the last 20 years. Probably over 1/3 of our population is visible, minorities. We have over 100 languages spoken in a city of 15,000. And we have to we've made real efforts to include them and to get their perspectives on how this community should be available to them. And now it's, we've never had an Indigenous community per se. We're not really close to First Nations, although they're not far away, but we've started to do that work as well. And so, and it's daily, it happens daily. We go down to the offices, and Aaron probably can speak to this strategy in the mayor's office. You actually walk down a hallway and you go to somebody and say, we have to get on this and get it done and do it. And that's what happens. And that's why all of these things stand to benefit. And, I brought up the systemic barriers. So I'll talk about, where it comes to healthcare or social policy, where the province stands in the way, literally stands in the way of community development in that regard. And I can tell you many stories here where PCNs were funded or not funded when we had a local issue, a local chronic health issue. And we were told by the province, the PCNs and downward, well, we can't fund that. We would have to fund that everywhere in the province, or we can't change that policy. We'd have to change it everywhere. That's ridiculous. So should every municipality be the paper stamped copy of everyone else? What would be the purpose of that? Yet from a provincial lens, we certainly have that in place. And I think, there would be so much more going on if those things weren't turned away. Another good example is in healthcare. I've been working on a project in the town of Bazzano within our county for nearly 9 years now. And I've had every province tell me what a great idea, our government tell me what a great idea. I've had every healthcare authority that I've had to deal with tell me what a great idea. Guess how much dirt we've moved in 9 years? Absolutely none. And how many people have gone by the wayside? How many seniors have been split apart? How much community breakdown has happened because they don't have services, because their loved ones are 100 kilometers away in another place? And these are the things that municipalities could move on if those barriers weren't in the way. And I think you'll see that happen a lot if those barriers are removed.
That's great. Thanks for that perspective, Barry. Maybe we'll go to Marianne next for just your thoughts on you touched on a little bit with the sort of discussion about forestry and sort of realizing what you're doing already and the consultants work that you've engaged in. So would love your thoughts on just how this work connects into what's happening at a municipal level or things you'd want to surface to the group for them to be aware of.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I would highlight since COVID started, COVID has really changed a lot of the way, or a lot of our way of thinking of how we approach business, how we approach work-life balance, how we approach business development in the future. And as any other municipality, we've seen a lot of people transition to working from home in every industry. We've seen education come back into the home base. What we've learned out of all this is we've had to be very dynamic on the fly to help businesses survive, including our major industries. And when I talked about projects like potential lithium projects, hydrogen, geothermal, I think we need to look in our own back door if we're going to survive as municipalities. As Barry had mentioned earlier, we have had a lot of downloading upon us. We have a lot of budget changes that haven't been positive for municipalities. A lot of our tax base to be sustainable and to survive comes from the commercial and industrial sector, not from residential. So we have to look at ways that we can ensure business survives in our community, has the opportunity to grow, that we have skilled labor that remains in our communities, and that's another crucial piece. And I think as we come out of this, we've got to look at everything through a broader lens. And the one thing, Sean, that I didn't see in this report that we talk a lot about in our municipality that we've never capitalized on is tourism. And I think that's something in everybody's backyard that we can take a look at. And I'm going to take Sylvan Lakes actually logo and branding, where they've looked at doing tourism that's resident focused, visitor friendly. And we've talked about that in our own backyard. If we're going to diversify, it goes much more beyond our energy sector and our forestry. We've got to take a look at what else we can do to bring people into our community from an economic development perspective. So I think COVID's changed that, where tourism for a lot of municipalities is such an opportunity. I think it's taught people to stay at home and be happy and look for things they can do in their own backyard to keep their families engaged and to visit with friends. So some of the things that we've learned in the last 15 months is we've got to be dynamic. We can't remain status quo. Like Barry said, we've got to change very quickly and on the fly.
Yeah, interesting. And appreciate the flags, particularly about tourism. It is something that sort of wasn't surfaced particularly through this process. And so it's sort of good and healthy to point out some of the holes that exist in this. And as a Whitecourt plug, to your point about going local, I visited the Whitecourt Falls a couple times during COVID to enjoy
Awesome.
getaway. Yeah. Okay, Lisa, do you want to finish this off here, just sort of addressing other things you think that we should be aware of for connections into cool projects in the province?
Sure. Well, I appreciated the fact that there wasn't an actual example in here when you use the plant-based protein supercluster as one of the examples of diversification and where there's opportunity, because I think that there is a huge opportunity in Alberta for looking at new and emerging sectors and how we can move forward with that. It won't surprise anyone that obviously, like, my focus and the moving into the private sector has been on supporting cannabis and that sector and industry through our client work. And the one thing that I think is really interesting, and it shows sort of the difference between municipal governments and the motivation there to just allow businesses to grow and opportunities for emerging sectors to happen without red tape or any barriers, is the fact that an industry like cannabis has been embraced in some ways by municipal governments. They've gotten out of the way. There hasn't been any issues. I find that they kind of go by the adage that if the legislation doesn't exist, things are allowed to happen. And that's a really important mantra to have, that you don't always have to have restrictive legislation in place to control. And the one thing I think is interesting statistic is the fact that the cannabis industry in Canada, it contributed $16.5 billion to the GDP last year. That's only $3 billion less than the automotive industry, and it's more than the entire forestry industry. It's more than the entire livestock production industry, than all of the tourism and events and arts and culture industry across the entire country. And 4 of the largest retailers in the world for cannabis are located in Alberta. Their headquarters are here, their companies grew here. But we didn't let that happen easily. There are so many barriers in place to new and emerging sectors. And I think showing this one here and the opportunities for it when you're talking about plant-based proteins is really important, but there are so many more that we could be looking at that are here in our own backyard right now, companies that need to be promoted, companies need to be even just respected, like the ones that we deal with. And I think that will be an immediate change and something that we can look at, because everyone wants money, especially as we go through COVID and we're looking at like a large economic contribution that needs to come from industry, from businesses, from just the general public who are now hoarding so much savings that they can be able to spend out in the community. We need to be able to look at where we can derive more revenue, and municipalities are doing that. And I think the provincial government has opportunities if they would, you know, get more behind some of these sectors that exist and pave the way for that to happen.
Interesting. Great stat. I did not know it was on par with the auto industry in such a short period of time.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
People it's COVID, right? People looked for opportunities to kind of de-stress, and that just bumped everything up when it came to cannabis and stuff like that, which is great.
We're starting to get some questions in on the Slido, so would again encourage, we'll move into a bit of Q&A there for anyone that wants to ask questions. The first question in there tees up a little bit on what Marianne had gone into about asking the question of if each of you see any gaps in the themes or pillars of the report. So Marianne, you identified tourism, and so maybe we'll open up to Barry, Lisa, or Aaron there for any thoughts on specific gaps you see looking through the municipal lens as you look at these ideas in this report. Maybe open invite for any of you that wanted to join in on that one.
You know, again, I'll just say an overarching thing. I don't see gaps in the broad context of this report. I think it touches on the things people are talking about, and we need to make improvements to in Alberta for sure. But I think one of just an overarching theme for me would that we should consider how municipalities can actively participate and what's in the way of them actively participating. Aaron made a great comment in the chat about how any conversation about moving forward, about making progress, really has to include our cities and our municipalities. Without them, you know, we do have a bit of a conflict, and we would sometimes work against each other because this process puts us in that position. So I think an underpinning for all of this should be, where do municipalities fit in? How can they actually be empowered to put a lot of this stuff on the road to success?
That's great. I think it's a really key point, even on issues like energy and energy transition and climate change. 80% of energy is used inside cities and urban environments. It's sort of where a lot of the rubber hits the road. So definitely hear you that there's a disconnect between municipalities and other forms of government for sure. Anyone else that wanted to comment on the question of just gaps that you'd see or areas you'd want to see more focus in?
I think just picking up on the point I was making, what Barry said, is that, you know, we're seeing here in Calgary, or even, and I know in Edmonton as well, with when cities want to undertake, say, major infrastructure projects that will have, you know, that have that future focus, that have that social inclusivity lens, economic diversification, all of that. You know, I've been in the mayor's office here working since early 2010, and I think it's been 6 premiers. And like lots of change at that level, and to have to adjust your long-term planning and your ability to be able to provide services to your citizens based, you know, so much of it is tied to what's happening at the province. It makes it really challenging. And yes, we've had to learn how to be more adept, and you know, over this past year, and we've been able to work very, very well with them on a number of different issues. So I don't want to say that that's that it happens everywhere, but it's just to have that always in the background, to be able to have some, you know, a real stable fiscal framework, stable funding that we can count on for infrastructure projects, those kinds of things would go a long way to be able to, you know, really build on some of the ideas that are happening here.
Okay. There's a really good question in the Slido, and then it touches a little bit on Ken Cantor's messages in chat as well. So the question is, do municipalities need to be funded differently? And the sort of tag add on there was not only for independence, but also for accountability. And so I'll ask that question openly to the group here. Do you think municipalities need to be funded differently? And if so, how?
Yeah, I do, for sure. There's no doubt about it. We do need a relational partnership when it comes to funding. So when you look at a municipality, just like everywhere else, we are not, our funding isn't, and our need for funding isn't driven by the buildings we have. It's driven by the activity that happens. Activity only comes from people moving around, people needing services, people moving in, people moving out, people migrating, people requiring access to services. So while we certainly need the hard infrastructure, there's no doubt about it, it isn't the only determinant of what activity level a municipality might undertake. So I think there has to be a relationship between that. And so because we don't have levers, like we're not allowed to, municipalities couldn't put their own sales tax, for instance. We're not allowed to do that. That has to be done something at the provincial level. So access to those levers are difficult. There have been several resolutions come. One came from the City of Brooks 6 or 7 years ago, where a percentage of the revenue of the province on the tax side would come to municipalities in exchange for getting rid of all the grant structure. So you essentially, you have a hard and fast percentage, you move up and down with the economy, so you're subject to the downs of the economy as well as a recipient of the ups. And it was a percentage of the total tax taken in for the province. And those kinds of methodologies do speak to predictability, and they do allow us to plan, but they also, you don't have to make budget decisions if you're the provincial government now. If the economy is striking down, municipalities have to be prepared to adjust as we go. And I think something like that would make a lot of sense. And I do want to mention one thing about transparency. Municipalities prepare their budgets in public. All of their documents are published and available to anyone who wants to read them. So, and we do all our pre-budget work in public. And I would like to see that happen across the board. I think that would make a big difference to accountability on all our spending, period.
Okay, that's great. We'll ask that same question to anyone else in the group. Do you think municipalities should be funded differently? Lisa or Marianne or Aaron, anyone want to jump in there?
I'll just jump in and echo what Barry said. I think one of the messages ever since I took public office is sustainable, predictable funding. And that's something that we haven't seen from a provincial level in terms of commitments being made and held to. When budgets have been put forward by the province and we've taken a look at doing long-term budgeting, that changes year after year. And that affects our long-term planning ability. So there needs to be a methodology or a formula come up that the province comes up with that's predictable into the future and doesn't change, whether it's based on a percentage of their revenues that we do the ebbs and the flows with them, but it's something that we can budget long-term with that isn't changed on an annual basis where we're trying to scramble and figure out how do we adjust our budgets accordingly. I think that's the one unfortunate thing of how we've been funded in the past. And I'm hoping that provincial governments going forward will look at something that is more feasible for municipalities and are willing to work with us to come up with a solution that works for both sides.
Yeah, it was interesting, Aaron's reference that there's 6 years in 10 years. You can sort of see that the elastic effect that could have. Aaron, Aaron, do you want to go?
If I could just add, sorry, to that, is that we did one of the major projects that our office worked on since shortly after Mayor Nenshi was elected was the city charter. And we made some progress over several years, working collaboratively with Edmonton, you know, in terms of the big cities. And we did develop a fiscal framework that the province agreed to after, I mean, it took a lot of effort to get there, but that would have provided that sustainable, predictable funding. And with a change of government now, that has been all of that work. I won't say it's been lost, because it was still there, and I guess it was a valuable exercise, but it just kind of shows how we need something that we can rely on a bit more into the future. So that effort has been put in and it has been done. We just need to have something that could last a bit longer than, that doesn't ebb and flow with whatever happens at the legislature.
Great. We are getting a few more questions come through in the Slido. We probably won't have time to get answers from all of them for the group. So do encourage the panelists. I listed them out 1, 2, 3 there. If you do want to take a second, anyone else who's listening or participating, if they want to jump in as well, it'd be good to get answers here. I do want to keep sort of 2 minutes at the end to do a final question of what's possible. What's your belief of what's possible? But maybe we'll take a second here. I think Kieran's question in particular around how do you as municipal leaders or in your municipalities plan to address some of these pretty sticky and thorny issues like Islamophobia, and any changes in policy coming down that any of you could flag or reference to the group? Maybe we'll pick on the mayors for this one. Maybe we'll pick on Barry and Marianne for thoughts on how you plan to address this within your communities.
So first of all, by speaking up personally, and that's something that you learn to do. I've taken some courses, took a really great course, a plug for compassionate leadership course that's taught by Amarjeet. It's amazing. But speaking up, when Black Lives Matter's here marching and listening, being seen to be leading that is important, because, sometimes the worst conversations happen in a coffee line or at the table behind you in a restaurant, and people feel that they don't have the power to speak. And I think to Kieran's point earlier, the status quo is not acceptable. That's exactly right. We should be able to speak up, and we should feel comfortable speaking up. But that does take a lot of courage. And so from my perspective as a leader, I have to be that example, and I hope that I get better at it. I have a long ways to go with that, but I try to call it what it is. We're a small community, and we have racists in our community. We have people who are bigots. We have people who are intolerant. We have to call it for what it is. And I try to do that as much as I can. On the other side, it's to provide a forum for education. Sometimes we wonder as elected leaders whether anyone listens to us, but actually people do. And so when people like Mayor Nenshi or Mayor Iveson speak up and are seen to be speaking up, we should all as civic leaders follow those leads, follow the leads of our peers. And speaking up is a great place to start. That would be what I would give for advice.
Great. Marianne, we'll go.
Absolutely. So I think I turned off my video. Absolutely. I'm going to echo what Barry said. It is totally leading by example. It is calling out those in your community that are racial. And do make the comments like Barry said, whether it's in a restaurant, whether it's on social media. And we have a lot of it, unfortunately, in our community. I think it's also working with those groups as well to see how we can do better and support them. The education piece is huge as well. I still can't believe sometimes that it's 2021 and we have the racial comments and the bigotry that happens not only in our own communities, but across the globe, but definitely it is leading by example.
Great. Well, for our last few minutes here, this will be our lightning round, sort of rapid fire amongst the panelists. And our final question is to open the floor for each of you and to ask the question, what do you think is possible for Alberta? And so we'll start with Aaron and we'll go from there.
Sure. I have 3 kids. They're 13, 11, and 4. I have to believe in what's possible for Alberta for them. And so that's behind, my motivation for doing all of this. This last week we had Mayor for a Day in Mayor Nenshi's office, and seeing the ideas that are coming forward from the young people and their willingness to get involved and to have as Tim Fox referenced earlier, to have those tough conversations and to challenge the status quo. I think anything is possible, and it's just up to us to be the enablers to guide it along the right path.
Wonderful. Lisa, do you want to go next?
Sure. I believe fully that Alberta we have an opportunity to get to a place where each of us feel like we no longer have to be ashamed to live here. And I'll fully say that like half the time right now when I'm online, I'm like, seriously, like I don't want people to know that I'm from Alberta. And we will get to a point where it will be a standard. We'll be able to celebrate that. We'll go out to the world and say, I live in Alberta, I live in Edmonton, I live in Calgary, I live in rural Alberta, and I am a great person that lives in a place of opportunity, that I feel respected, that is got rid of racism to a point that we can lead the world. I want to get that. And I agree with Erin. It's because my boys live here, and they will for decades, I'm hoping. So I think we can get there.
That's wonderful. We're into the countdown time. Marianne and Barry. I'll go Marianne first and then Barry.
So for me, I've got 2 kids, 26 and 28. I want them to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I believe when I look at this report, I think everything is interconnected in terms of being diverse, being inclusive. The only way we can get there is by combining all of these equally for the next 30 years to come out ahead and be one of the most sustainable provinces in our country.
That's wonderful. Barry, last thoughts?
Last thought is, I think if we can